Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the future evolution of humanity. With me is Professor Thomas Lombardo. He is the director of the Center for Future Consciousness in Glendale, Arizona. He is the author of The Evolution of Future Consciousness. Other titles include Future Consciousness, The Path to a Purposeful Evolution. Mind Flight, A Journey into the Future. And then there's a collection of essays titled Wisdom, Consciousness, and the Future. He is also the author of a forthcoming series of books about science fiction, a 4-volume set, the first volume to be published in 2018, on science fiction as the evolutionary mythology of the future. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's good to be here again.
Good to be with you once again.
Yes.
You've spent a lot of time thinking about the good future, about wisdom, about the evolution of humanity, and you've studied the world's scientific science fiction literature, where there are many different scenarios for the future evolution of humanity. Yes. I suppose the most archetypal of these scenarios is that we will become a spacefaring species. We will migrate to other planets and eventually interact with intelligent beings not from this Earth.
Yes, in fact, that's a common theme that comes up. And I was thinking about this topic, and I wanted to illustrate it, in fact, with a triad of stories that illustrate something important about how science fiction looks at the future evolution of humanity. As we all know, H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine, and in The Time Machine we have these two species that emerge, one of which is cannibalistic and the other which is feeble and is the food for the cannibalistic Morlocks. Mm-hmm. That vision was informed by Wells' understanding of contemporary society and evolution as he understood it at the time. 40 years later, we come to Last and First Men, where Olaf Stapleton develops a much more elaborate vision of the future of humanity, involving now purposeful genetic engineering and space travel and various different species in succession who develop increasingly more powerful minds. If we jump ahead again to the 1990s, we have another classic science fiction novel titled Diaspora by Craig Egan, who brings to bear on his vision of the future of humanity new ideas in contemporary science, including virtual reality minds and robots.
Yes.
So what we observe in the history of science fiction is this ongoing evolution of visions of the future of humanity. And we also observe this evolution of the very ideas of evolution itself, because we have bioengineering and now we have virtual reality coming into play. And there's an interesting scenario that emerges in Diaspora, which is the human species has divided into 3 different distinct forms, one of which is biological and fairly much keeps the present biological form that we have. The second form is a human conscious mind downloaded into a robot. Yes. So we become robotic humans. The third version is that we become virtual minds, and they are humans who exist in virtual reality are conscious, but can manifest themselves in any nanotechnologically constructed body that they want. The drama of the story, and I probably give away the ending here, but the question comes up, only one of those three species survives. And which one is going to survive? Now, without divulging the ending right now, what we observe in those three species are increasing physical, psychological, conscious, and scientific abilities. And they represent one way of thinking about the future evolution of humanity, which is how might we expand our consciousness, expand our physical and scientific powers. And science fiction repeatedly delves into ways in which humanity in the future could expand either along mental dimensions or along physical dimensions. So I think that novel and then the sequence of three novels illustrates how in science fiction we have not only this evolving notion of the way humans could emerge and how they would be in the future, we come up with this idea at the end of alternative human forms. And the virtual forms, believe it or not, become the ones who are spacefaring because they can take their bodies in which are housed in very compact computers in spaceships and journey out into the universe.
If they spend 1,000 years in outer space, it won't matter.
It won't matter, right? And so the future evolution of humanity, although not everybody agrees with this, to me seems to necessarily involve having to go out into the universe that we exist within and find ways to modify ourselves such that we can live and thrive literally in outer space. And it seems as if that a important development in our future, which hasn't occurred yet, but I see it as something that is highly probable and will be very significant, is when we make contact with other forms of intelligence or other forms of life. Right now, we are sitting here by ourselves, and although we imagine other possible forms of life, other forms of intelligence, I think it would be an immensely enriching experience that would transform us, indeed, to find and interact with alien intelligence. Now, as a possibility, though, there's a risk to it. Yes. And of course, we've envisioned that too. So now, if I were to ask you the question, which of the three forms of humans survives in diaspora, what would be your guess?
My gut feeling is that the ones who maintain the physical human body are likely to do better.
Okay. Yes, and that's not what happens.
Oh, well.
Oh, well, yes. In fact, the biological form of humanity is totally wiped out and destroyed by a cosmic event that ripples out into the solar system and actually destroys the robotic humans as well. It is the virtual reality humans who survive and get out of the solar system and actually go in search of both understanding the universe at a deeper level and moving even beyond this universe into higher levels of reality.
So the virtual reality humans are some sort of disembodied consciousness that can jump from nanotechnology vehicles from one to another.
Yeah, they have to have a physical embodiment within a complex computer.
Yeah.
They experience reality consciously within a virtual reality created by that computer, but that computer also has the power to create nanotechnological bodies for them so they can manifest themselves in the physical world, but in whatever form they wish to manifest themselves in the physical world. So they have this flexibility of form and substance that the first two do not.
Yeah. It's sort of, in a way, reminiscent of, in parapsychology, what we think of as possession, where a disembodied spirit supposedly can jump into a body, maybe even take it over temporarily or completely, or perhaps even reincarnation, where the disembodied spirit goes from body to body to body. Only in this case, the story writer has made it technological.
He's made it technological, and the logic of it is that if I can replicate the informational structure of the physical entity which has the consciousness, and if I can replicate it accurately, then I could manifest that consciousness in an alternative body to the one that it presently is. So it does have the appearance at one level of a conscious mind jumping from one body into another one and into another one.
Yeah.
And in fact, in this case, that conscious mind can create whatever kind of body it wants to jump into.
And when you say replicate, it sounds as if in this instance, the human, I'll call it spirit, can be cloned.
Yes, it could be cloned in the sense that you could have multiple versions of the same conscious self existing simultaneously and, in fact, living separate lives. There's another science fiction novel that actually came out a little bit later called Accelerando, where we also have virtual minds and there is literally splitting of streams of consciousness in that in the scenario created there. And so we have multiple Jeffs, for example, all starting at one bifurcation point, who go off and lead different lives, different conscious streams, and in fact may meet each other somewhere down the line in the future.
You know, that's very reminiscent, interestingly enough, of a New Age novel written by Jane Roberts, who was a trance channeler, called The Education of Oversoul 7. In this novel, the Oversoul 7, is an oversoul of 7 different people living simultaneously from the point of view of the oversoul, but in different historical periods, so that the activities of one person, maybe in 20th century America, might actually be influencing a different aspect of the oversoul that is alive and functioning in 14th century France or something of that sort.
And in fact, what you get there is you get a transcendence of localization in time. That the conscious mind could be able to participate in multiple realities, multiple times, multiple locations. Now, this may all sound kind of crazy, but when you start to think out what may be the future possibilities of what we could realize, either through technology, the evolution of the conscious mind, and the evolution of our understanding of what the mind and the self even is, then there are some very bizarre possibilities that could emerge at different points in the future, and they may transcend the present reality that we participate in, which is a single self in a single conscious mind in a single body in a particular slice of space and time. We can move out from those constraints.
Well, in Star Trek, they always talk about space, the final frontier.
Yes.
And many people say, no, it's inner space that's the final frontier.
Yeah, and you don't even have to use the word inner space. You could just simply say that the manifestations and evolution of consciousness and intelligence is the final frontier. And again, to bring the theme of the aliens back into this, part of our education, and again, I'm not trying to sound flaky or fuzzy-wuzzy or woo-woo or anything, but part of our education could be through contacting and interacting with alien minds that in some significant way are different from us, and that in fact would help us to further expand or enrich upon our own conscious reality. That occurs in Last and First Men, in fact, where communal minds help human minds to achieve communal consciousness.
Well, there's a vast literature, not so much in the science fiction area, but in ufology or UFO studies, a vast literature suggesting that humans are already in contact with alien species, that humans are being abducted, impregnated, taken to other planets and educated there and brought back here, that there are actually alien cities that exist underground or under the ocean. And, you know, much of this literature is not written as fiction either. These are accounts from people who claim they are firsthand witnesses.
Yes, right. And whatever, or let's put it this way, whatever credibility you may give to such stories, those narratives still provide you with a lot of food for thought regarding various possibilities, if nothing else, that could occur in our future. And that's not to deny, because I can't really deny with any certainty, that aliens may not be among us right now.
Sure.
In fact, if I was a sufficiently advanced, intelligent alien, I would in some way make it a point that if I didn't want to be observed and noticed, I wouldn't be. And that scenario gets played out in science fiction too in different ways.
And the nonfiction writer Jacques Vallée, in several of his books, Passport to Magonia, The Invisible College, suggests that we are being manipulated by what we think of as alien beings from UFOs, but their intention is only to manipulate us at the unconscious level, at the mythological level, that they are deliberately not landing their spaceships on the White House lawn.
Yeah. And we talked about this already, but the issue does come up regarding contact or interaction with aliens and whether the intentions of the aliens are benevolent or malevolent, or whether it's ambiguous, whether it's whether or not they are attempting to help us or in fact hurt us. We talked already about Childhood Zen, where in fact the aliens literally facilitate the end of humanity in order to bring about the next positive step forward. In fact, as Darwin pointed out when he wrote The Origin of Species, that he did not believe that any presently existing life form in the form in which it existed at his time would continue indefinitely, that all life forms are transient. And that would, of course, include humans. So when I say that the central goal or purpose of the Center for Future Consciousness is to facilitate the purposeful evolution of humanity and human consciousness and future consciousness, I quite well realize that purposeful evolution eventually is going to mean some form of transcendence, that we are not the last step.
Yeah.
That is a bad bet. That's a bet based on a belief of our ancient religious traditions that humanity is in some sense the pinnacle of creation. I do not think that. I think we're a transient step. So whatever particular mechanisms, human, alien, evolution may be involved, the future evolution of humanity is going to involve the end of this kind of humanity and at least one, if not multiple other kinds of humanity taking its place.
And it may take a long time. I mean,
yes.
Some species, cockroaches, I suppose, have been around probably for a billion years or more.
Right. But we move fast, and we are exhibiting significant evolution over biological evolution over the last 2 million years as our brains have grown bigger, and we've acquired a multitude of technological and cultural skills. And now that we are able to also participate in the beginnings of purposeful biotechnical and genetic engineering, we will speed up our evolutionary process even more so.
The other thing that's occurred to me, Tom, is that each year, as I understand it, because of our industrial capacity, we are putting into the environment, I believe it's 50,000 new chemicals that have been synthesized that didn't even exist before. So those chemicals are becoming incorporated into our bodies and in ways we could hardly begin to anticipate how that's changing the human species already. But I have heard, for example, that women are starting to menstruate much earlier than they ever did.
Yeah. Right.
Men are becoming less fertile than they ever were.
Well, it's foolish to think that human nature is static. Human nature is transient. And it's also foolish to think that humans are not impacting their environment. And the environment is in a reciprocal relationship with humans, and consequently, whatever we're doing to it is going to feed back upon us. Now, you could take a position of, well, we need to adapt to it, or you could take a more proactive position, is we need to more intelligently orchestrate it, but there's no way in which we are not affecting that environment, and in turn that environment is not affecting us, and there is no way in which we will be in the same place we are today, 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now. So I brought this up in an earlier talk that the fact that we are engaging in purposeful evolution in an evolutionary universe strongly indicates that we are going to orchestrate and alter and change, and perhaps together with other intelligent minds, the transcendence of ourselves into perhaps diverse other forms in the future, possessing not only just powers, but qualities of existence that to our point of view might seem really incomprehensibly strange and bizarre. But then any realistic future usually does, as has been pointed out before, create dissonance within our minds.
It may well be that the kind of personality who is sort of very much on the fringes of society today, the outsider, the loner, the person who sees things very, very differently from everyone else, maybe the paranoid schizophrenic, for all I know, will become dominant.
Yeah, although some people will say that the paranoid schizophrenic is the last version. If you've read Julian Jaynes and the Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, his theory is that schizophrenia is the previous state of human consciousness before a singular self-responsible consciousness emerged around the time of Homer and around the time of Moses.
Yeah.
But you do have a point about, it's an important point, which is that one does get a lot of fringe personalities that emerge, fringe characters that emerge on a continual basis. And within a Darwinian model, those are experiments in evolution, most of which will probably fail and would be dead ends. But there is this adventuresome and chaotic element to the journey of, even if we guide it along, at the same time, there will be various experiments, you say, of nature, which will contribute the unexpected into the whole thing.
I've always been fascinated by the X-Men series.
Oh, the X-Men, yes.
Where you see a variety of mutants being born, each with special individual powers. And as a student of parapsychology, as I look out, I see, you know, people like that. Now, they're not as strange as in the Marvel comic book series, but they have various unusual psychic talents that are not supported or recognized by the culture. And I think to a certain extent, some parapsychologists, perhaps like myself, see themselves as the Dr. Xaviers, because, you know, we give these people a measure of support, a measure of acknowledgement, a measure of actual testing and verification, and which often it's hard to find. And I suspect, to be quite honest, that the capacity for various gifts that are thought of today as paranormal, gifts of the spirit, that this is growing in our population. And one of the reasons it's growing is because more and more role models exist both in reality and in fiction.
And one thing to consider about what you have been saying the last minute or two is that the human species has a general tendency to want to maintain a certain interpretation and system of reality. And the
principle of homeostasis.
Homeostasis and stability and conservation, and locked into paradigms of thought and behavior. So anything that will represent a possible move out of that constraining mindset and reality is going to be either ostracized, minimized, if not even attacked or destroyed. So I don't think we could imagine the future evolution of humanity as being an entirely peaceful affair, because there are those in power, there are those who want to preserve the status quo, and even with the X-Men scenario, as you well know, the powers that be in the world in various ways have attempted to get rid of, capture, annihilate what they see as a threat to their continued existence and power. And you will be perceived as an aberration. There's something wrong with you. Why don't you toe the line?
The very word mutant has a kind of negative connotation, not a positive one.
It does. So Philippa Z. Farmer, who is a science fiction writer, said at the beginning of one of his science fiction novels that if Jules Verne could have looked ahead into the 21st century, he would have crapped in his pants. And even though Jules Verne was seen as a visionary at the time, the strangeness and differentness of the future that emerged would have been very upsetting to him. Okay? And so it's not as if one wouldn't expect where we might go the different directions that wouldn't be upsetting to our mental equilibrium today. Evolution is this ongoing struggle of change and stability, but the change keeps happening, of course. And it seems to me that there is a moral imperative to evolve ourselves, because not only do I think that humans are not stable and that we are the last version of creation, I think there's lots of room for improvement. And so I think that we need to work on creating, stimulating, and holistic and inventive visions and ideals. And even though it's a precarious and risky reality to participate in the actual experimentation of the whole thing, I think we're responsible to, and even though he has such a negative connotation, play the role of Frankenstein, in the sense of thoughtfully attempting to create something which is living and intelligent but is different than us. Go ahead. You were going to say something right
what
there.
You're talking about, and we've discussed the Frankenstein story in other interviews, is the idea that the scientist Frankenstein was attempting to play God. And in the Western Judeo-Christian tradition, that is considered blasphemy.
It's considered blasphemy.
But in other religious traditions, the aspiration toward godhood, toward enlightenment, is the path. It's the path of yoga. It's the path of Buddhism. Even if it ends ultimately in nirvana or a kind of nothingness, it's still a godlike nothingness. So we have various cultural differences here, and it strikes me that in both technological ways and in spiritual psychic ways, we are evolving toward what one might think of as a kind of divinity. As our minds reach out into the cosmos, both through imagination and through technology and perhaps through remote viewing, and there have been some very interesting experiments showing that the human mind can anticipate the discoveries of various space flights.
And other things that we don't even imagine yet. And don't even imagine. But go on.
Well, I'm an advocate of and a champion of the idea that humans are, in fact, and ought to, in fact, pursue that path toward what we call divinity or godhood. We hardly begin to understand what a word like that really means.
Right. And in fact, I think that whether it is us, our descendants, and whoever else is involved in this process across the cosmos, with many variations and experiments on it, we will be inventing that very reality. We will be thinking it out, and we will be working on it in the sense that I would say that, I'll use the myth of Prometheus for one thing, that Prometheus presumably brought the gift of fire to humanity such that humanity became self-determining and no longer were children, obedient children of the Olympian gods.
Right.
Yes. So Prometheus symbolizes mythically this notion of personal empowerment. Now,
and challenging the ruling deities of the era.
Now, our tradition is that the personified forces that rule the universe existed prior to us and somehow exist above us. But a thoroughgoing evolutionary cosmology, which I think I hear you advocating for, would argue instead, like Frank Tipler does in the Physics of Immortality, that if we see any legitimacy in the concept of God, then God is a creation that is going to emerge in an evolutionary sense from the participants of the universe itself. And it's an adventure. It's something out there ahead of us. And what that will mean is, to some degree, totally beyond our comprehension. We just briefly talked, you briefly talked about the idea of consciousness existing in multiple places and multiple times, okay, which is some kind of a first approximation to omniscience, or at least a sampling of perspective experiences.
A little glimpse of omniscience.
Yes, which you can expand upon. You can expand upon it where you can have multiple minds all over the place. Say, for example, in Last and First Men, where you have them by the billions, if I recall, all of whom have their individual experiences at different locations on their planet, and they can simultaneously experience all those perspectives when they integrate together as a communal whole, as a singular conscious mind. So the possibilities for the evolution of mind and consciousness, spanning and reaching out into the cosmos, we've explored it a bit in our imagination. Some people say that they realized it in their own experiences to different degrees. But I believe we're just scratching the surface on this. And so we got to think now and continue to think as we go along, what are going to be these preferable directions that we want to take? What's going to be good for us? What's going to be of value? What's going to be ethical? I suggest in future consciousness that we need to live a wisdom narrative, in the sense that we need to envision our future lives as dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom, and that we should guide our future evolution as a species from the perspective of wisdom. So it's not that we just want, gee whiz, a lot of brains or a lot of power, or wow, look at the things I could do, like our different Avenger characters. We want to have a capacity for understanding what is good, what is best, what is of most value, and so that our enhanced powers actually serve the betterment both for ourselves and, in fact, as a strong possibility, humanity in the future may in ways integrate with other conscious living forms, both on our planet as well as out there in outer space. What I'm getting at here is that we may develop communal consciousness with chimps, dolphins, whales, et cetera, down here on the earth.
Well, Professor Thomas Lombardo, this has been a pleasure. I commend you on your lifelong pursuit of the future evolution of humanity based on wisdom. That is a clarion call, and I see you as a representative of a future wise humanity beckoning us in this direction. So this is the last of our interviews of this series. I want to urge all of our viewers to check the listings for previous interviews with you. They're all exciting and interesting and wise.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for being with me for this series of interviews.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for being with us.